Hello everyone, this is B-Belt Dan, and welcome back to Blender, where I am constructing or reconstructing the Enterprise J. I have to apologize for the lateness of this episode. I was hoping to try to get it out a couple of days before the day that you're seeing it, but I was having problems with OBS for some reason, which is why you're now seeing my taskbar down along the bottom right here. It seems like that for whatever reason, I haven't figured it out. I usually use Game Capture, so it only captures this screen right here and doesn't capture if I bring up other screens or this taskbar. But for some reason, it's not working properly. I don't know what it is, but whenever I'm running through the Game Capture card and even the window capture, not card, but the Game Capture, the window capture filter, I can't select vertices, faces, edges in Blender and manipulate them. I don't know um, the details behind what's going on. I just do know that it's mostly with the multi adapter compatibility click mark checked is when I'm starting to have the problem. So I toyed around with it for several days, did quick search on the internet, couldn't really find anything that helped me come up with a solution to the problem. So we're just going to go ahead and do a display capture, and we're going to go from there. But from the last episode, as so we're going to go from there. From the last episode, I was starting to work on texturing, and I asked all y'all about what would y'all rather have me do. Would y'all rather have me try to texture the whole thing within Photoshop, which would basically, if I continue on this tutorial type atmosphere, I would open up Photoshop and show you how to do textures? Or would y'all like for me to show you how you can create textures using Blender? And I didn't really hear from anybody, so I went ahead and made the executive decision to go ahead and kind of show y'all how y'all can use some of the features that are built into Blender to create textures if you're not, or more detailed or more complicated textures if you're not very good with either Photoshop or GIMP, or you don't have access to Photoshop, or you can't get GIMP for whatever reason, you're just not good at using those type of programs. And for the most part, I mean, this way particularly works. I've already kind of worked on some stuff, and I'll show you all here in a minute. But we're going to go ahead and right now work in within the saucer section here, and because I've already gotten one of the textures already done. So let's go ahead and take a quick little gander at that. Going into the UV image editor. Now, if y'all remember, is that I was trying to work on, if I still have it here, is that it? Okay, that's trying to come up with a Aztec hull design to use for specularity on this. So when the light shines on it, we get different hull plate details, the famous Aztec hull structure. And and the results were kind of mixed. I mean, within Photoshop, it was becoming a little bit complicated to try to get it just right, and we were, some of the stuff was not lining up properly and everything. And if I spent several hours on this, I could probably get this to look right. And I know some of y'all are probably looking at this thinking, oh, well, this is just easy, Daniel. You can just do this and this and this and this. But once again, some of us may not be as savvy, you might probably say. So I came up with another method, and that is using just a simple little Aztec design right here. By using this Aztec design, what I went ahead and did was is that I might have to do some maneuvering around, is I went ahead and assigned all of these little hull details that I wanted to have the Aztec design to where it was only utilizing just this one texture. Let me go ahead and set this up real quick, and I'll be back and show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, this is what I've done. Now, the Aztec, when you're design, when you scale out, looks very noisy, but when you move in, you start to see the details. And I wanted that purposely because this is a huge ship to try to show that size. If I scaled the Aztec texture, the hull texture up to try to match the rest of the ship. I was afraid that it would might make the ship look a lot smaller, you know, because these would be small little hulls. I mean, details that we would probably see. So this is what the finished design looks like. And what I did was, if I go into a UV image editor, and let's go ahead and make sure that we are using the correct UV. If I go in and let's go into edit mode, and I start selecting all of these vertices you can see here, they're all using the same square texture right here. So I just replicated it over and over and over and over again. And for the most part, I mean, that does look good. But the thing is that well, this part I could actually keep it like this with no problems. If I want to keep it like that for design look, that would be just great. But what I wanted to do is to use this same feature to try to generate this design over and over and over again, but using one UV map. So, and by doing that and using the bake feature, which is right here, and we'll go over more of this in just a minute, using the bake feature, it auto-generated a UV image that looked like this right here. And as you can see, it using this, it generated this design overlay over a brand new UV or a brand new image. And now I could use this on one UV map to map all this out, because I don't know if all these UV maps will come out in other programs. So I want to try to get us all on one UV map if possible. Now, the downside to this is that if we look and zoom in here, we don't have a lot of detail, but that's okay. That lack of detail still translates to a pretty decent looking specular map that we see on this. And let me go ahead and pull that up and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, went ahead and moved everything around, and you can, in the material tab or the material view, you can see kind of what that design starts to look like. And if we go ahead and render that, okay, it's still rendering in, but as you can see, it doesn't look actually all that bad. From a distance, I think it would definitely pass as a decent hull Aztec texture. Of course, there are some areas that are messy, and I'm okay with that. And you can actually improve the resolution of this using several different methods, um, you know, such as a larger image size, or try to scale up the area of where the Aztec hull texture is, you know, being used at, and downscale all the other textures as well into a much smaller area if they're going to remain one color. So there's things that you can do, and but I just quickly just sloppily put this together, and I might go back and probably fix that. But for the most part, I think that looks well. So let's go ahead and go into something a little bit more noticeable and ultimately something that we're going to be using. So let me go ahead and go back into. So as you can see here with the whole saucer section, I just temporarily got this one little texture here that we saw in a previous episode, which is, I think it was, no, not Top Saucer Aztec, Top Saucer texture. Yeah, no, not that one. Okay, this one right here. Utilizing this, it's the same texture that we've seen before in previous episodes. I just want to remove that slight Aztec pattern that we saw over here. And this right here, I want to use primarily this color and this color and this color to generate the overall hull design, as far as hull plates go. So, and to generate using a UV map that I've already plotted out, I want to take it to where I can place this design, replicate, like if I want this outer area here to be this dark color and this inner area here be this light color, all I have to do is just place out in squares here, and then create a brand new untitled, or and then create a brand new texture and use that to where I can take that texture that is, I'll tell you what, let me go ahead and show y'all. Let's go ahead and just go straight into this and show you step by step. So first thing that I want to go ahead and do is I want to add in and create a brand new texture. So we just go over to here, create new image, and title it whatever you want. I'm going to call this top saucer texture and give it whatever size that you want. Excuse me. Of course, the bigger the texture, the more details that you're going to have, but let's try it with just 2048 right now, 2048. Let's do the same thing here, 2048. And I'm going to leave all these options, but we're going to go ahead and click 32-bit float. 32-bit float will give you a little bit more resolution, but actually you can do it without it. So either or, it's your choice. Actually, let's do it without it. 32-bit float will just generate a much larger file size, and I think that it'll give you a little bit more resolution. Now let's go ahead and just use this. We're going to click OK, and that's okay that if that's black. Now, this would be a whole lot easier if I was using Blender Render, or at least the process that I remember doing before with other models. It's a lot easier with Blender Render. This is going to be my first time using Cycles Render. I will switch over to Blender Render, but we already got everything all set up for Cycles Render. So let's just push forward with Cycles Render. So what I need to go ahead and do is I need to go into Node Editor, and the texture that I'm eventually going to use to take the place of this, which we have under Starship Gray, I need to generate a brand new image, which I already have here. This was for when I did the Aztec haul. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to here, and I'm going to select that top texture saucer text that I just created. Oh, and make sure that that is in there. You have to have this in your node editor, but it doesn't have to be connected to anything. It can just sit right out there. Okay. Now, what I'm going to go ahead and go do here is I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to create a brand new UV map. And this UV map, I can name it whatever, but I'm going to call it top saucer text. And this is only going to be used just temporarily. So if I go into my UV image editor, and let's go ahead and pull up this secondary hull texture that I want to use. Make sure that this is selected. Now from here I can go into edit mode, and I can select, let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to select everything in here. I'm going to do a U, and just right now I'm going to do a reset. It's going to reset all of those UV maps. Now, just to make sure that I am on, just to show you that I'm only making edits in this UV map. If I click on this UV map, it shows me all the different UV maps that are used for each. Now, just to show you that the UV map that I'm editing is only this, and it doesn't affect anything else. If I click on all these, you can see what is brought up, all the individual UV maps, other UV maps that I've been working on. I'm only interested in working in this. Oops, no, I don't want to go into rendered. Go into now here, this isn't showing me anything. So if I want to see what's going on over here onto this, I need to make sure that I go into a node editor. And once again, I'm working in here. I'm going to have to make sure that everything is, let's see, set. This right here is what I'm using, this chain right here. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to temporarily disable this and move this straight over to there. I don't need to have, let me go ahead and disable that as well. I don't need to have this set a series of nodes active yet. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to tell it that I want to use my top saucer texture UV map. And now, as you can see over here, each and every single face is utilizing that texture, as you can see here. Top, bottom, everything. But I don't want that. I want this all to be different textures. Now, one other tip that I could probably give y'all is with y'all's image is to make sure that you're using images that are tileable, which means that it blends from one edge to the next edge to the next edge to the next edge. So it looks like it's all congruent. I don't think I'm going to have too much of a problem with the texture that I'm using. I may, and I might have to go back and generate a different texture, but just forewarn, make sure that the image that you're using is tileable. Now, I'm going to deselect everything, and let's go ahead and let's start off with this intersection here, which is also where the Aztec Hall texture is at. I'm going to go ahead and select all of these center rings, or all these center faces. I'm going to go ahead, click there, hold down my control button so I can select, just the whole inside ring. Okay, now I have all of these. Let's go ahead and go into top view. Okay, now I have all of those faces here selected. So now I can go over here into my UV image editor and I can scale all of these down and move them over to an area that looks like it should be good enough. Now if I zoom in, we can see that texture is now repeated all across all of these hull plates for all these faces. So I'm just going to do the same thing with this outer portion and this inner portion, but I'm going to use a darker texture. All right, everybody, it took some time, a lot more time than what I was originally expecting, but I've got the texturing finished. Is it easier? Yes. Is it the quickest? I really don't know. I think that's just kind of a matter of opinion, but let's take a look at what we got here. As we can see when I zoom in, I have each and every single one of these plates all textured up, and they're matched to either one of these three little quadrants here. I have these little areas in here, these little, I don't know, recessed areas in between major hull plates. Using this texture just for now, I may end up, actually, I know I'm going to change it eventually, but I wanted to use this kind of grill texture just at first because these little areas are going to be part of the advanced technology that this ship has in regards to its shields and its defensive and offensive systems. And I've did this little flat portion right here below it, and yeah, below and above it within the lighter texture, and the majority of the ship is going to be using this darker texture here. Now I have not done anything on the hull or anything major on this the main hull yet. I just mostly focused on just this saucer section. And it took me quite a long time, a lot longer than I thought it was going to take originally, but finally got it done. So let's go ahead and continue to move on with this little bit of a texturing tutorial, you might probably say, using the bake. But before we go into that, let me show you exactly what all I've done here. Is that if I go ahead, it's it's a big jumbled out mess right here, but you can see what I did is I took each one of these. Now, probably what I should have done And I could still do this. It's the best thing about this is that if I don't like this, in Blender, I can always go back and redo this. But I just took each one of these individually and placed it in here. And for these dark areas here, and actually yeah, I did the same thing here. There, each one of these are individually, and I squared it off into a section here. But for here, what I did is that I went ahead, took like usually in quadrants of 3. Let's see, this is actually kind of doubling it up a little bit, but as you can see here, did in quadrant of 3, pressed UV to UV map it, and then I moved it over into here. Looks like there was one that was, whoops, let's try that again. One of these is taking up an entire quadrant, maybe? No, it's not. Okay, there we go. Yeah, just went ahead and took 3 of them by quadrant and moved it out to here. I didn't do these to here, but I could do the same thing. I could just go ahead real quick, just if I wanted to make it a lot, a little bit, what's the word I'm looking, repetitive in here, I could take just like 3 of these, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, or let's just do 2, press UV, unwrap it, and then just scale this and move it over into here. And I could do the same thing here, UV, unwrap, this over to here, just to get something a little bit different. Let's go ahead, take all 3 of these, UV map it, and there. Now that looks a lot less repetitive. And I might go back and probably fix that with the whole thing because yeah, actually that looks better. I will go back and do that on the whole thing. But just for the sake of this video and just so we can get it out, let's go ahead and see how this looks or how we go about it. Real quick review of what we did is that first off, and I've actually did a a few things differently. First off, I went ahead and I created 2 new textures, a top saucer and bottom saucer section, and apply those onto there. The top saucer is only using the top saucer. The bottom saucer is only using the bottom saucer. And I did this mostly just so I can have individual textures tied into each one of these because we're only going into a 2048 by 2048 texture. So to try to utilize as much of that space as possible, I'm giving the top section and the bottom section their own individual texture. So I separated those, and each one of those is going to have their own separate UV maps. And this right here is the UV map that I came up with for the top saucer. It does definitely need a lot more refinement, and I'm more than likely I want to once again kind of refine this. This is not the finished look. This is just more of the sake of proof of concept, experimentation on my part because I'm kind of learning along with y'all on how to do this. And that way I can kind of take a look back and see how it looks and see where I want to improve. And I've already done this bake process once, and I've already know of areas where I need to improve it. Let's go ahead and go forward. So we have into the node editor because I created 2 different textures. I created another node, and once again, I have this image texture here. It's not tied to anything yet. But it's just laying out right here, and it's loaded in with the texture that I want to bake to, which is the top saucer texture. Now, what you want to do is make sure ambient occlusion is on. That's very important because if you don't, it's going to come back black. As far as baking is concerned, you could toy around with this to figure out what you want to do, subsurface scattering or emittance or anything like that. If there's any emittance there. For right now, I'm just going to just leave it as is. I don't remember if I just said, even though it might have been about literally a minute ago, but make sure that you don't have any of this selected or don't have nothing selected. Make sure this is selected here. Okay, then you can go into UV image editor. This is, you don't have to do this, but I like to usually bring this up and so I can look at the UV texture. But once you get everything set up, make sure that your object is selected that you're wanting to bake to. Make sure that it is by itself. If I was to go ahead and have this in, this is going to imprint itself onto this texture as well. So make sure that it is by itself. Think of it as kind of like that there's a virtual camera that is flying around it here, and it's getting all the angles at the same time, and it's going to sample like an area here and put it into here, and put it on the texture. If I have this in, it's going to see that there and it's going to imprint that onto this texture. So make sure it's by itself, anything underneath it is going to be shadowed. So make sure it's by itself, make sure it's selected, make sure that the texture that you have this listed under is selected, and you go into your ambient occlusion, make sure that's on, go into your render, and just simply click on bake and it will do it for you. And we see up here it's going to start slowly moving along, so we'll give that a minute and see what it looks like. All right, and after a little bit of time, this is what you are left with. It took every single texture that was on here and it drew it out into here using the UV layout. And that was another thing I forgot to mention. Make sure that on your UV maps, you are using the UV map that you're going to use with this texture to texture back onto this. Now, if we look at this, it's not as detailed as it probably as it could be or probably should be, but that is due to, for one, this is, how should I probably say, it's this circular area is not quite set up properly to try to utilize the space of this as good as it probably should. I mean, squares and things and stuff would be a lot better. I mean, you got like an empty space here, a lot of empty space here. I could put this inside this empty space, but then that would make this have reduced texture pixel sizes or number of pixels that could be used than this. So I try to even it out as best as possible. But, and the one thing that I also don't like is the jaggedness that is right here. It's like there was a bit of anti-aliasing that might probably help, but um, it doesn't look as good as this does right here with the textures by itself. And as mentioned before, I would keep it as this here, but I don't think that a lot of these extra features, like all these additional UV maps and stuff that it takes to make this, would carry over another another external output like a OBJ or an LWO file or anything like that. I'm not 100% positive. Plus also now I could take this texture, put it into Photoshop, and then I can go in and start to put in texts and things and stuff. In fact, I can even draw onto this, or once I get this onto this, I can actually draw and paint onto this using the texture paint mode. And like if I don't have Photoshop once again, but I'm real good, if I have a stylus, I can write like NCC 1701-J onto this and it'll tie it back into this texture. So let's go ahead and real quick take a look at see what it looks like when I apply it onto this. We go back into Node Editor. Let me make sure that I'm selecting the correct texture, which we have for Top Saucer. And I'm going to go ahead and use, actually what I could do is just this. Just 1 and 2, that out, and make sure that I'm using the, actually let's do this. Just for testing purposes, let's go ahead and add another input UV map and use, this one is using Top Saucer. There we go. And voila, that's what this looks like with that new generated texture in. You can tell it's a new generated texture because as we can see here, yeah, that's where that pixelation is not coming into play, and I don't like that because it's not covering in this area as well as it should. So I'm going to have to go back and fix this. But once again, this is what this episode is for. It's not only for you to learn to see an alternative method of texturing your ships using only Blender if you do not have access or not very knowledgeable in Photoshop, but or even GIMP, but also just another way to do it. And once again, we can go into texture mode, and I can go into texture, and if let's go into UV image so we can see how this all works out. I can now go in and start drawing things onto this, and as you can see, it'll actually show up on this as well. So let's go ahead, uh, trying to remember how to, oh, it's not on here. Is it on this side? Yeah, here it is. So like if I wanted to do NCC 1701, I can go straight to black and make it to where my radius is, let's try four pixels, and then I can do NCC 1701 dash J, and it'll actually draw it out onto here. And then I can go in and rebake all of these and it'll be just fine. So I could do that with this and it'll show up on that. Obviously my handwriting with the mouse is not that good, but you could still go in and you could do some painting and everything like this. In fact, I've used this feature moderately when I'm doing, like when I'm creating a creature or something, a monster or something in Blender, and I want to try to work on the textures just a little bit. So let's go ahead and remove all of that because I want to keep it like this right now. Eventually, I'm going to go ahead and go back in and redo all of this. Oops. Let's go back into object mode, material. I'm going to redo all of this and figure out if there's a better way for me to have it to where I don't have so much bleed through onto this, but I'm going to try to fix all of this, but from a distance, definitely it doesn't look too bad. I mean, you still got the variations of the different colors. You could zoom in, you know, relatively close and still see what looks like to be hull plating. And then if you're good at Photoshop, you could take this into Photoshop and actually improve on it a little bit more. So there we go. That is another additional way of how you can use Blender to texture the ship, especially if you don't have good knowledge in Photoshop on how to do texturing. You can do it this way. And now this is not going to be the finished result. I'm going to be working on this. So in the next episode, you're going to see better textures, especially on this, maybe even, or on the saucer section, especially, hopefully, on the battle section or the secondary section. And then we don't have that many more episodes before we can call this version, version 2.0 of the Enterprise J done. So let me know what y'all probably think. And if y'all have experience with, with the baking textures, and y'all see something I'm doing wrong that y'all would like to go ahead and, so to say, share with the class and let everybody know that, hey, we need to try this instead of this and you'll get better results, let me know. I know there's a lot of things I could do. I can go with a bigger texture. I could probably reduce the margin of how far the pixels go out for bleed through, and that might help. But mostly I think I just need to go back into the UV maps and maybe UV map all of this separate and put that into a different area, and then just have it to where it's just flat black. That might work. Or I might actually take this into Photoshop and do a kind of a pattern texture that I wouldn't mind patterning through all of this, and just individually, just select all of these grid lines here, do a UV map reset to get into a square, and then just map it up into that. Similar to what I did with these lower facing slung windows, which for some reason the windows are not there. I'll take a look at that in a minute, but let me know what y'all probably think. Let me know if y'all have a bit of advice. I apologize that this episode is coming out a little bit later. I've been having a couple of issues, computer issues, a couple of other issues, but I've also got a bunch of other stuff that I'm working on as well. Part of the reason about why I'm going to try to cut this, this particular series short. But let me know what you think, and thank you for watching. This is B Belt Dan, and this is the Enterprise J in Blender, and I will see you next time.